purchased in the farmstead was purchased by E.B. Solomon in 1800. His father, Jonah Solomon, was a Jewish merchant and tavern keeper in Freehold. His uncle, E.B. Hart, was a Jewish merchant and tavern keeper in an area during the Revolutionary War in colonial times known as Jewstown, which is now Colesneck Village. So we're in probably one of the earliest Jewish, in a building that links back. Well, the barn was, the farmhouse is the white building that you see outside that's now an art shop. This barn was probably built in 1875 to replace the original colonial barn. But this is certainly an apt setting for not only our exhibit, but our speaker this afternoon, because it's the Jewish farm. The Jewish, E.B. Solomon's Jewish father married a local Protestant girl, so E.B. Solomon was raised Christian and all his descendants are Christian, but at least for 3 generations down, this was called the first Jewish farm in Monmouth County. At the end of the Revolutionary War, anyone who still, the handful of Jews in the area who still wanted to remain Jewish, went back to New York. And E.B. Solomon and the Harts did not establish any Jewish community. And that did not start till the German Jews came in larger numbers right before and after the Civil War. Our exhibit really starts like the 1920s. Well, it talks about farming in the 1900s. This afternoon, we're going to hear about farming communities and colonies that started way before that time. I would like to just, before we turn the over, to alert you that, raise your hand, Alan Richmond, the gentleman you see here, is the author of this wonderful article, New Jersey Jewish News. He's been writing a whole series of articles on our exhibits and our programs, and the last one was on this Jewish farmers, retired Jewish farmers who spoke here, and Stephen Cohen. We also have another distinguished guest. Raise your hand, Mr. Beachcock, please. If you look at that poster over there, and then look at the picture to the bottom right, the second poster to the left, it says the Beachcocks, 3 generations of Monmouth County Jewish farmers. Mr. Beachcock is in his early years. In the bottom right is in his uniform, and he put on a program for us too. Now, my co-chair, first of all, I do want to remind you that please turn off your cell phones. There's a second staircase to my right, over here, right past that chicken portrait. My co-chair, hang on now, Rabbi Robert Fierstein, even though he's the one who first told us about Jane Stark in the museum, could not come here today. Rabbinical responsibilities has taken him away. But he's the one who wrote this introduction to our current exhibit, and which fits into our program. In the late 19th century, many Eastern European Jews were inspired by Back to the Soil movement, popularized by groups such as the Olam, the Eternal People, fueled by 19th century Romanticism, by the urge to escape from pogroms and persecution, and a desire to shatter the image as a Jew as a merchant, business person or pauper. The adherents of this movement sought to transform the Jewish people by going back to the soil and working in agriculture, much as their ancestors had done in ancient Israel. Jewish farm colonies were established all across the United States, but the most successful were in southern New Jersey, starting with the Alliance Colony near Vineland. Now, J.B. Stark, our speaker today, is executive director of the Sam Aziz Museum of Woodbine Heritage. She came to this position after years of working in the business world, culminating in becoming general manager of the WMG and NBC affiliate in Atlantic City. She was always interested in Jewish life when she moved to South Jersey. Right? That interest flourished and expanded into the directorship of this museum. So tell us about the museum. And I'm waiting so much to hear about it. Now.
Thank you, Jean. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jane Stark, and also with me today is my colleague, Orny Kaplan, and we are in a beautiful county in New Jersey, in a beautiful area of New Jersey, which is completely alien to us as residents of the state. When I say that, it's not that we haven't been here before, but we live in extreme southern New Jersey. We live below Vineland, New Jersey. We live in northwest, well, we operate our Jewish Heritage Museum in northwest Cape May County. That would mean because we live in New Jersey, if you go by the exit numbers, we're exit 17 on the Parkway. So you would be going exit 17 and then getting off and going about 15 miles west, inland. Now, until about 12 years ago, I knew nothing about the Jewish community in extreme southern New Jersey. I lived in Philadelphia and then came to Margate, Atlantic County, where there's a great, there are a great number, 5 synagogues, and still by your standards, we would be considered a smaller Jewish community, but nonetheless, Atlantic County had a thriving Jewish community. Cape May County had a reputation for having very few Jews. It was very interesting to me to learn that there was an incredible Jewish heritage across what I call the Mason-Dixon line, crossing over the bridge from Atlantic County into Cape May County. And I can tell you, I remember when I first told a Holocaust survivor, a friend of mine, that I was moving across that bridge, she shook her head and waved her finger at me and said, "Oh, no, 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 no Jews allowed." So much to my joy and satisfaction, after a number of years of being in the community of southern New Jersey, I discovered that there is incredible Jewish heritage, particularly of what I came to talk to you about today. I would say I know something about Vineland, of course, have many friends, have attended life cycle events in Vineland. It has a very rich Jewish heritage, and I might also add that Vineland began as a very anti-Semitic community. It had a history of deep anti-Semitism. But when we talk about Woodbine, sometimes people immediately think, oh, you must have had chicken farms. No. Woodbine was founded in 1891. Woodbine became a community through the Baron de Hirsch Fund. And Baron Maurice de Hirsch was a German Jewish philanthropist who used his money to try to help get as many Jews out of the Pale in Russia as possible. And I think we all are students of enough history that we understand why it was necessary to try to help save Jews from the pogroms and from this being conscripted into the Tsar's army. When Woodbine, quite frankly, became a choice through Olam and through the Jewish Agricultural Society and Hyos, all who participated in the expansion of the philanthropy that came through Allianz first, the Rothschild money, and then the de Hirsch money, Woodbine was just a number of acres alone in the woods where there wasn't a sign of life. The only thing that existed in Woodbine at that time was a railroad track. And I did bring a photograph. I have some photographs that you might want to look at the end. I think it's a little bit awkward for me to hold up photographs. And I don't usually talk with notes, so the heck with the notes. There was nothing there. So the original Russian Jewish immigrants who made it through steerage and into Ellis Island and then through all of the horrible experiences of finally finding their way to Woodbine. When they got there, there was a little shanty next to the railroad track. So of course their job was to build a town. They had to literally cut through the forest. And Ornette and myself, neither one of us live in Woodbine. I live at exit 25 of the Parkway and she lives at exit 36. But when we go to Woodbine to work every day, we often talk about how beautiful it is when we come off the Parkway and come down Route 550, which we call Baron de Hirsch Boulevard, not realizing, by the way, that that was the official name for many years. What a beautiful piece of country, farmland, flora, fauna, the way New Jersey used to be. In the days when we called New Jersey the Garden State, and it truly was the Garden State. So it was a beautiful area, but at that time, very barren and very difficult. Now we all know the stories of the struggles of the Jews, and we all know the stories of the struggles of the immigrants. Woodbine went through the same struggles. Not because the Baron de Hirsch Fund didn't supply them with the necessary means to try to carve out a life. But I'm looking at Woodbine Mishpucha here, and I'm sure she knows a lot of stories about the difficulties and the hard times. It was rough. This was not a chicken farm community. When this community was established, it was established as an agricultural experiment. Being here and looking at the information on your walls and just being inside of what was once a part of a real barn, it's such a wonderful kind of drawback into the memories of our history, because it just reminds me that how many people outside of we who have had to arm ourselves or were born into families. You talk to the average Jewish person in the United States of America, and they don't know from borscht about being a farmer. They don't know anything about farming. And when you tell them that my grandfather or my great-grandfather came to America and went to a small town in New Jersey, whether it be Roosevelt or whether it be Woodbine, and that they became a farmer, let alone an agricultural farmer, or a chicken farm, the first thing people would say, particularly post-World War II, oh, chicken farmers. No, Woodbine started as an agricultural experiment. Now what that meant was that the Baron de Hirsch theory was to raise the Russian Jew up to the level where he could raise his head, put his shoulders back, and have pride. If any of us here are of German Jewish extraction, please forgive me. Most of us know that there is a distinction between German Jewry and the rest of the Jewish world. So the idea that the German Jews were a step above, and that these poor, downtrodden souls came and had to lift themselves from being peddlers and being quote-unquote, in doing my historical documentation, that name, that horrible moniker, Dirty Jew, was really part of an identification that society had of the Jewish peddler who went from town to town and had a very difficult life. And I can tell you that in the history of Woodbine, 3 miles from Woodbine is a town called Dennisville, which was totally 100% Christian in every way, shape, and form. And for the Jewish farmers in Woodbine who managed to be successful enough to have goods that they could try to sell, A, they had to find transportation to go 3 miles, or they walked, and B, they didn't have time or facilities for regular bathing and regular amenities that we're also used to, so the people in Dennisville called them, oh, here come those dirty Jews. Now that's certainly an unpleasant statement, but when you try to learn a little bit about the history of it, you understand it wasn't necessarily as anti-Semitic as it was an anti-social statement. So now these Jewish people in Woodbine, who were all Russian Jewish in the very beginning, had a difficult time. From 1891 when they arrived until 1893, they began to build a synagogue. Our museum was the former Brotherhood Synagogue, and it still remains as an Orthodox synagogue in its inception. The basement of the synagogue was turned into a very lovely and very beautifully appointed museum to the history of the community. First, the Jewish history, and then the evolution and the multicultural change that took place over 100 years. So very like being here today and looking at the artifacts that you have and the wonderful statements, very similar, I must also tell you, the way that we tell our story, and also oral histories, which are so important, so that you have people who can really recant to you, not by urban legend or by gossip, but by real facts. And we know that the memory is valuable, and what I remember may not be the exact same thing that my sister remembers in the same family, but generally we have a pretty good idea of the true historical situation of the evolution of the community. In 1896, the synagogue was finished and it was consecrated. Now, from 1896 until today, 2014, the synagogue stands as it was. In the late 1990s, the synagogue had really gone into tremendous disrepair, as many synagogues in small communities where there was once a thriving Jewish population had changed, and there was a danger that it might be sold to a Jews for Jesus organization. And there were only a handful of Jewish elders left in the town. From 2000 in 1924 to maybe 25 Jews in the late 1990s who still lived in the limits of the Woodbine community. So these elders were very frustrated and upset, and they went to some of the former Woodbine Mishpucha who had become very successful and had the money to help them. The most successful, financially successful person who was available was a man called Sam Azes. And so our museum is named after Sam. Sam made his money. He came to Woodbine as a little boy with his grandparents from New York State, his grandparents and his mother. He didn't have a dad. The name Azes, as the rabbi had formerly thought that we must have been a Sephardic synagogue with a Syrian background because the name Azes is attached to our name. That name Azes was the name of Sam's birth father. But because he was not Jewish, Sam's grandparents sat shiva for their daughter and said, "Out! We don't know you anymore." But when Mr. Azes sort of melted into Lower East Side Manhattan, she came home to Mama and Papa with the baby, and Grandpa said, "You can stay." but never again do I hear the name Aziz. So Sammy grew up, and his nickname was Sammy No Name. His grandparents had a bakery and a boarding house. And he was a very bright, precocious kid. And by the way, there are some friends who have Woodbine roots who live here in Monmouth County who grew up with him and told me this oral history about Sammy, that he was always in trouble. And Mr. Gottlieb used to say, stay away from that kid. He's nothing but trouble. Every time the chickens are upset, I know it's that Sammy. He's in there messing with the chickens. Well, Sammy was a precocious child, but also very bright. And he got 2 scholarships to college and actually went on, became an engineer. And eventually, he and 3 partners invented the mechanism that replaced the ticker tape on Wall Street. And with that, he made his first $1 million. After that, the world was his oyster, and he became extremely financially successful. He never forgot his Woodbine roots. In fact, he drove the same car until the wheels practically fell off. It was a source of embarrassment to his business partners and to his family, but he didn't believe in throwing anything out. If you could still make it work, he fixed it and he used it. And he's a practical guy. He used his money in the 1970s to invest in the cell phone industry. Now, we all can remember when cell phones used to be like carrying a brick on your shoulder. He didn't even get into the cell phone industry here in this area. He did it down south and out west. Tennessee, Kentucky, South Carolina, and out in Montana and Colorado, and places where some of us, although some here certainly know Colorado, but some of us have never even thought of starting a business. And he became so wealthy when he sold his businesses at the age of 66. He sold everything to the largest satellite provider in the world. So you can understand why he would have had the deep pockets to be able to tell the last handful of elders in Woodbine, don't worry, I'll fix it. So, unfortunately, he had a massive heart attack at age 68 and died. Now, when Sammy died, his family remained very true to his original desires, and they went forth and provided the money, and they took the synagogue and they restored it to its original integrity, so that everything there, with the exception of moi and the young lady to my left, is in its original, to the extent that we have such a verstunken heater thing upstairs in the sanctuary. When we have visitors in the winter, it's so old, and we've had people come in and look at it and they say, well, you know, it's from the early 1900s. And we have people say, you know, it still works. But what we have, we turn it on. If we're going to have a big group and we do a lot of entertaining our groups upstairs in the sanctuary, we have to turn it on the day before, let it run all night because it sounds like it sounds like a freight train is coming through the building. And then in the morning come in and quick turn it off, and it's the truth. And when they restored the shoal, one thing, and I always tell when people say, Jane, why don't we have air conditioning in the shoal? And I say, well, we couldn't do that because it would have interfered with the historical integrity of the building. We do have air conditioning downstairs in the museum portion, which, as I told you, is the basement of the shoal, where they had mud floors. And I had a young lady come in about 10 years ago whose grandparents were the Benson family, who were part of the original founders of the community. And she said, oh, I have to see the bathrooms. And I thought, well. So she went and she came out and she said, I'm so disappointed. You put floors in the bathrooms. my grandmother was in charge of keeping the bathrooms fresh, and she always had fresh flowers, and it always smelled so wonderful there. And I said, well, you know, part of the plan was to try to modernize to a certain extent. So we have, and there is an American Disabilities Act, and we had to make it accessible for handicapped, and also have lavatories for men and women. So with that said, when you come in and you see, we have a timeline and lovely historical documentation of the story of the community. It's a multicultural story. It's not just a Jewish story. And it's not just a story about that agricultural experiment. Baron de Hirsch made it possible. And then Olam and the agricultural movement to help resettle immigrants around the United States also were part of the historic journey of these people. But the community itself began to take on a different look after about 25 years when some Polish and Ukrainian immigrants came, and then lo and behold, into this Russian environment where they spoke Yiddish in different dialects. And if you know your history, you know that I'm told that depending on the dialect, you knew that person on the street was either a Bolshevik or a communist. There were very few of those who were part of the Woodbine original history. Those original Woodbiners were very orthodox, very religious, and there are people my age, which I'm 71, and I have a 72-year-old friend who is a grandchild of original Woodbine settlers who sometimes accompanies me and tells the history of the very strict Orthodox environment of the community, which lasted for many, many years. And then he also throws in the fact that most of the boys his age all did the awful thing. They all married chicks. And of course some of them, he said the reason for that was that the Woodbine settlers who struggled so hard and came to America for the reasons that immigrants still come to America, not just for religious freedom, but also for economic opportunity. The mamas in particular did not want their daughters to marry Woodbine boys because Woodbine boys in the head of the mother were not going anywhere. They wanted their girls to go over to Millville, go over to Vineland, go up to Atlantic City, go to a shul fight, and meet somebody who's going to college, who's going to be a doctor or a lawyer, and be able to be a good provider. So Larry tells me that, you know, many of these girls did convert, and of course we're going back, how many years? We're going back 50, 60 years, but the core of the community was always very Orthodox. And our synagogue was the largest. There were a few others. You know the story. In every town there's a house that has a little candy store downstairs, and there's a shul in behind her. People live upstairs and the shul is downstairs. However, the Brotherhood Synagogue remained the largest and the most successful, as did Woodbine remain the largest agricultural farm experiment of the Baron de Hirsch colonies. Baron de Hirsch established colonies. We were talking before about Iowa. I don't think he established a colony in Iowa, but it's great to come here today and meet two Jews from Iowa. How awesome is that?
And I want to tell you, he did South Dakota and North Dakota.
Yes, he did.
Because I read some of it.
He did North Dakota and South Dakota, and Orny and I met someone about 5 years ago. We were at the convention for American Jewish Museums in Chicago, and I was fortunate enough to be able to give a paper on Woodbine, and I said, oh my gosh, Orny, the biggest cities in America are being represented here. They're not going to work. They won't know from Woodbine. So I started with my spiel, and I said something. The interesting thing is that we had 18 families, 18 German Austrian families, who were able to get out of Germany before they were arrested and sent to concentration camps. After the war, we got about 25 families who were sent from DP camps. Now, as you know, Vineland got a preponderance of Holocaust survivors. Woodbine, not that many. But when doing historical documentation and trying to do oral histories and speaking to Woodbiners and trying to absolutely identify who were the Holocaust survivors who came after the war in the early 1950s, 1951, 52, 53, that was still coming from DP camps in Europe. I asked the German Jewish person who was very adamant and very correct that he is a Holocaust survivor. He was 5 years old when the Nazis came to his parents' farm, and his father was arrested, and we have pictures of him at that farm. His father was arrested, and his mother and he were left alone. The closest neighbor was a Catholic family that was probably, down the highway from here. And they came and they took him and his mother and they hid them in wine casks. And this little boy, this man who is now in his late 70s, can still remember what it was like to keep his head level in the wine cask so that he wouldn't sink down and drown. Wonderful story of survival. And a number of, not only did his father see the handwriting on the wall, through a good German police captain knew Mr. Gottlieb Sr. and he released him from jail. And when he came home, he said to his wife, "We're getting out." So they got out. And they came to America through a cousin in St. Louis. And then that cousin had told them about another cousin in Philadelphia. And from Philadelphia, they wound up in Woodbine. Why? Because the senior Mr. Gottlieb, who had 400 years of German Jewish history in his heart and soul, and was a farmer, true, a German successful horse farmer, couldn't stand the idea of raising a child in the city. So he saw an ad in the paper for an agricultural farm in Woodbine, New Jersey that needed a manager, and he answered the ad. He saw the ad in a German language newspaper, and so he came to Woodbine. Now, 25 families came from the German Austrian side, 18 to 20 Holocaust survivor families. So I said, who were the Holocaust survivors who came to Woodbine? Because we can't find documentation. And the German Jewish man said, "Oh, I don't know." They kept to themselves. Okay. Now, I've been doing this now for 10 years. So now I try to find Holocaust survivors. And we're Ornette and I are both very involved in the Holocaust survivor community of Southern New Jersey, and have been for many years. Ornette has her master's in Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and I am a founder of the Holocaust Resource Center at Richard Stockton College. And when I was general manager of an NBC television affiliate, we did 68 oral histories of our survivors in Southern New Jersey before Steven Spielberg recognized that he was Jewish and made Schindler's List. We already had more than 50 oral histories at that time. So the long and short of it is, I found a Holocaust survivor who admitted, by the way, some people don't want to admit that they come from a small town or from very meager beginnings. But this woman admitted that, yes, in fact, her family had been in Woodbine, but then they moved to Vineland because Vineland was bigger and more prosperous by the 1950s. Woodbine was on the decline, and Vineland was way soaring, big town. So she said, well, I said, did you know the German-Austrian survivors who came to Woodbine? And she said, well, they kept to themselves. So you know we were our own worst enemies, aren't we? And we can always talk about Jews and opinions and who's right and who's wrong and who the third person is with the correct answer. But here's another example. Woodbine remained a very harmonious environment, and that's the uniqueness. Not just the Jewish roots, not the agricultural experiment, not the first agricultural school in the state of New Jersey, which was in Woodbine, the Baron de Hirsch Agricultural School, not the Rutgers tomato. How many of us know the Rutgers tomato? I'm a former Pensy girl. When I moved to New Jersey, I wanted to make a little garden. I went to a garden market. You have beautiful garden marks around here, by the way. And I went to the garden market and I said to this lovely grandpa, sir, can you tell me which kind of a tomato plant I should plant? And he said, Rutgers. I said, excuse me? He said, Rutgers. R-U-C-K-E-R-S? No, Rutgers. Well, ironically, Jacob Lippman from Woodbine, New Jersey, developed the Rutgers tomato plant. And Jacob Lippman went on to become the head of the agricultural, the dean, very good, the dean of the agricultural school at Rutgers, and on and on. So there's a lot to be said for the wonderful heritage of hate and prejudice that did not exist in Woodbine. Yes, diverse opinions. Yes, the German Jews didn't talk to those people from Eastern Europe. And yes, there were Ukrainians and Poles and eventually a lot of Italians, as in Vineland, but a lot of Italians came into Woodbine and did some very wonderful businesses there. Woodbine, as Millville was the site, the Millville Airport was the site of the Israeli Air Force that was put together with a bunch of rickety old planes, and they took off and landed. Many of the greatest victories for establishing the state of Israel began at that little airfield in Millville, New Jersey. Well, in Woodbine, New Jersey, the airfield was used as a place to teach pilots how to take off and land on an aircraft carrier. So if you go to Woodbine today, you'll see big signs that say biplane rides, and oh my God, you couldn't get me in a biplane for anything. Those World War I planes with two, what are they called? 2 sets of wings. Yeah, 2 sets of wings. Oy vey. I mean, that's like a disaster waiting to happen. But the Woodbine Airport played a very major role in World War II. So with all of this said, today, the general population of Woodbine is very mixed. We do a lot with the museum itself. We wear a Jewish hat one day. We wear a community service hat another day. We wear a genealogist hat. As you know, people come, they want to put together pieces of their family history. Or we become educators. But the most important thing that we try to stress there is that there was never, and to this day, it's still prevalent among the people who are thinkers and movers and doers, that there's no prejudice in Woodbine. And during the time when Woodbine was a 100% Jewish governed community, the New York Times documented it, not Jane Stark, that Woodbine was the first fully Jewish governed community since the fall of the Second Temple. Now, that's pretty cool. And if the New York Times says it's true, it must be true, you know? I'm not so sure about that, but it's a lovely little piece to lean on sometimes when people are foundering and wondering, what in the world is she talking about? The idea of multiculturalism in the community. There are many Afro-Americans, many Latinos, we just did an event called Celebrating Generations, where we honored an Afro-American who was 86 years old, born and raised in Woodbine, who to this day, when Jewish visitors come, and they may be my age or your age, and they're looking for information. Someone, say, between my age and your age came recently, and she wanted to know something, and I said to our Stockton, we're part of Stockton College now, I said to our Stockton security guard, Dougie, do you think your dad would know? He called his 86-year-old dad on the phone, and Mr. Watkins, of Afro-American background, said, well, of course I know the answer to that. So we just did this wonderful thing called Celebrating Generations, where we honored an Afro-American, and we honored a Jewish boy who is the grandson of original founders, and we honored the person who founded the ambulance corps and was also the superintendent of schools for many, many years, and many of the students who came out of that school say he was the best teacher they ever had. Each one from a very different ethnic background, but all who played major roles in the community itself, and the unity among them is genuine. So we still try to teach kids that, you know, the reason that your great-grandparents, and I sometimes will say, if your great-grandparents or your great-grandparents came to this country for the same reasons that immigrants come today, and I don't think there will be too many who came on the Mayflower. Only once did I have someone raise their hand and say, well, I came on the Mayflower. We try to stress the ethic of tolerance. And we are also the designated teaching center for Holocaust education for Cape May County. Until Ornita and I came and developed the museum to the degree that it has been developed over the last 10 years, there was no such animal in Cape May County. Holocaust education, what's that? And I must tell you that 3 weeks ago we went to Millville, and we brought a Holocaust survivor from Howell, by the way, and we had 350 kids. And he's a child survivor. A month ago, we took a Holocaust survivor who was a child survivor of Auschwitz to North Wildwood. Now, you've got to know. If I say Wildwood, you say dregs. You say, ooh, Wildwood. But I must tell you, North Wildwood isn't bad. But we looked for an ethnic diverse child in that. There were 100 kids there. We couldn't find one. They were all the same white bread, which is my dad used to say. He was kind in his way. He would say, no, I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to do what those white bread people do. And that was his way of saying that we should be true to our roots and so on. But it was absolutely not diverse in any way. But we brought an 82-year-old woman who was a child survivor of Auschwitz, and Dr. Mengele, and these kids were phenomenal. So we're doing wonderful work. They don't know from us about being an agricultural experiment or being the first fully Jewish governed community in the world, or at least in the United States back in 1896. But they know from us because they learned that the Holocaust really happened, because they met somebody who was there and she told them about it. So this is, I mean, we're just a very diverse group. We do a lot of wonderful things, and part of wonderful things is you're so kindly inviting us to come up here today and share our farm heritage with you. Believe it or not, there isn't a day in my life when I don't learn something new. I'd be stupid if I said different. But I met new friends today, and I also learned new information about another part of New Jersey that is also, to others, a well-kept secret. So I thank you for listening, and thank you for having us. Have any questions?
I had two questions.
Yes.
One was, how did Baron decide on this area?
He didn't. What he decided on was the concept of using the money to help to get the immigrants who needed settlement somewhere. They needed to find a way to get them into areas where they could become self-sufficient. It was really Olam and the Jewish Agricultural Society and Alliance, which was, as we know, that's the French pronunciation of alliance. That was the Rothschild family. They hired people who really understood how to buy land cheaply and how to buy land where Jews could flourish, who could really reestablish themselves. The other important thing is that when we have people who come to our museum, and I'm sure that you have the same experience here, Jewish people come, they relive, maybe not what is on these walls, but there's something that they heard from their parents or their grandparents or an experience that they had, and they're reliving their heritage. It's a reconnection. It's part of the journey and part of the Jewish continuity that's so important. So the Baron de Hirschfeld bought land in Verstucken places. You know, it wasn't like they went to the Gold Coast anywhere and said, oh, we're going to move in a Kessel Garden of immigrants. But the important thing is that most of those immigrants established their communities and were true to their heritage as well. They were able in a free country, and that's something we always have to remember, that they could be Jewish, they could speak a different language, and they could have a synagogue, and they could, as one survivor who also lives up here in Monmouth County, who was one of the German Austrian survivors, Liesel Haas, wrote, and I have framed in one of our display areas, she said it was so amazing to her to come to Woodbine and to be allowed to have an opinion, to be allowed to say what she felt. Not, it just happens it was Woodbine, but it was America. And that was what was so important. Here, go ahead, just talk into that little round phone.
The 1880s, maybe before, there was a very a ferment in the Jewish community. A lot of movement. There was a Haskalah that was almost like it actually was probably like industrialization. The time, time and people became more aware of themselves. They were no more, they became freer, and the Zionist movement started around that time. And also, there was also a lot of poverty. Somehow they're healthier and they had more children, and there was a lot of population. And that's why you also have the migration of the 20th century. About that. It was, I mean, most of the people came around that time. There were other things about immigration.
That was the great wave of immigration.
Yes. The largest one. And as part of that, like the Zionist movement was established in the 1900s. The Zionist Congress and things like that. And also, there also was they felt the journey back to farming. To be self-sufficient by producing stuff. And I gave the book out, I don't know exactly what it was, but it talked about these Russian people that came here, and they had no background at all. They didn't know anything about farming, and actually in the whole thing almost misfired. They tried to believe because they didn't have people living. And
it's by Dr. Joseph Brandy. Said, I'm having a senior moment, but I saw it. It's up front. You have this book. And that book is here. That book is here. It's up front in the display case. I know the author, but I can't think of his name.
It's up.
It's by Dr. Joseph Brandy.
And that really gives a very good background on what has happened. And eventually they settled down and some people left and, then there's quiet everything all the time about the church. Now, what the one thing you have to remember is, it's like the 60s in the United States, there was a lot of changes in the 60s. And once in a while, they have these periods. Back in 1848, there was also a program also. Karl Marx got up and people like that. And how is that considered what it is today?
Very true.
If it's the Brandeis book that you wanted, it's Immigrants to Freedom.
That's it, Immigrants to Freedom. That's the book, I believe. Yes, son. Now, 2000. 2000. And what was it at the height of its Jewishness? 2000. Which is very interesting.
How many Jews are there now?
12. Ornate and I would make 14. But we come and go every day.
You don't sleep overnight.
No, but I will tell you that we get between 5,000 and 8,000 visitors a year. And since we have become more experienced in how to market and motivate for visitors, besides using it as an educational tool, advertising in the Jewish newspapers in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania has reconnected hundreds of people who had wood mine connections. And when they find out, I just did my first ad in the Forward about a month ago. And I got calls from people who are close to 100 years old. One woman, she was absolutely giggling and crying at the same time. How can I get there? Oh my God, Woodbine, oh my God, it's still there. And so her name was Mickey Goldberg, and I got her whole story in one conversation. And I said, Mickey, if you can, I didn't know she was 98. I said, if you can get on a bus, she lives in Manhattan, and you can come to Atlantic City, I personally will come and get you and bring you and stay with you. But it's amazing how when you reach out, just like you, I mean, you marketed this for just simple little walk to drive up the Parkway and have this lovely experience. A lot of people have found out about it because you put the word out. And we get to a certain point in our life when we're more interested in learning new things or more than what we thought we already knew. And I like to say that we're all kind of in that age group where learning something new about our socio-economic and political, I could go into that for a long time, but you're very right. The world's political positions and had a lot to do with what happened with the great waves of immigration. And this one was the big one for Jews in particular.
But do you ever do field trips where you take people?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. And we're there now. We became part of the Richard Stockton College of New Jersey almost 3 years ago, which means that Michael Lazy's, the son of Sam, gave a $5 million gift to the college and gave us to the college with the $5 million. So you could call us the $5 million girls if you'd like to. So now we're part of this institution that has, and we miss the autonomy of being a standalone where we could really be independent and free, so to speak. But being part of the college has opened up many doors for us
So
too.
do you call the college to make an appointment?
No, you call the museum. I mean, I brought brochures, and I have business cards, which I'd be happy to give you. And we have tour buses that come to Woodbine, and the townspeople come out, and they say, "Oh, who's here?" Or the kids come from school, and they say, "Is Michael Jackson here?" We have one restaurant.
At the table, at the desk,
Uh-huh.
like a sheet that if we set up.
Oh, good.
You can leave your name and your phone number on that sheet.
That would be great. We would love to have you. I'm so sorry. Yes, this is the Brotherhood Synagogue. It's beautiful. It's big. We did a bar mitzvah 2 years ago. We had 250 people. But of course, it has the gallery, which are no longer. We are egalitarian. We are egalitarian, and we now, by the way, we do high holiday services every year, and when we became part of the college, that was part of the deal, that we still be allowed to operate as a synagogue when necessary. So we now have a female Reconstructionist rabbi from Philadelphia, who is our rabbi, and I have to tell you, some of the toughest men in terms of what is halachically correct, love her. So she's coming back for the 4th year. They love her, and I was very worried. You know, you hear a woman rabbi, oh, you can still hear the rumbling in the building. But we do other things. We do life cycle events. Pardon? We don't have a minion there. And for instance, every year we do a Shabbat in the Shadows of History, Shabbat in the summer, with a congregation from Wilmington, Delaware. They come from Wilmington to Belle Plaine Forest, someplace you've probably never heard of, and neither did I, which I know you know, which is in southern New Jersey, beautiful, and they camp. And they walk the 2+ miles from the campsite to the synagogue and have a full-blown Shabbat. So when we have, that's when, for that and for a bar or bat mitzvah and for the high holidays, we have our minions. It threw you. Yes, or Syrian. And it does spray you. And Rabbi, your board member also was very sure that we must be from another world. We couldn't possibly, and he even asked where our Torahs came from, and then I explained to him that the name Aziz is purely coincidental. It has nothing really to do with our heritage, but everything to do with the financial means, which made it possible for me to be here today, and for you all to come. Hopefully you will come, and I promise you there's more of what you had in mind. That in fact, I decided to do my homework before I came today, and I have a folder over there, and it's got a lot of that political stuff in it. And I thought, well, these people don't look like they want to hear that, so I went the other way. But you're right. You're absolutely right. Well, no, I'm the executive director of the museum and the administrator for Ann Azie's Hall, which is our teaching site. I'm like an administrator. Every day I teach myself how to get through the day and try to impart good information and gain information from you all. So thank you so much for putting up with me. I really enjoyed it. It was an honor to be here. Yes, ma'am. I can't get this to you. Come up. You won't go. I can't get it.